Okay. Tonight we are going to conclude, almost conclude. We're in the very last chapter of Hilchos Deos, and this is the chapter that the Rambam decides to devote to the important laws of lashon harah. And he begins the seventh chapter off by saying Hamaragel b'chavero over below tase. Right? He uses the word miragel. Right? That should strike a chord, as in the Meraglim. What were they known for? They were known for lashon harah. So the verb that the Rambam carefully selects is the word liragel, which in Hebrew also means to spy. All right, what the connection is to raglayim. We'll talk about that by Parsha Shlach, but not for now. But anyway, so spying is akin to lashon harah. Okay, so that's how the Rambam starts off by saying, if you're meragel b'chavero, right? If you literally means to gossip and to say lashon hara about someone, well, chavero or not chavero, you're over below taseh. Shenemer lo selech rachel ba'amecha. The way the Torah describes lashon hara, it doesn't say don't say lashon hara. It says lo selech rachel ba'amecha. Okay, don't walk around. Literally, the word rachil is a peddler. The Gemara uses that word sometimes when it wants to describe something. That's someone who just keeps on going on and on and on, right? It says atu tana ki ruchlaka, right? Where the Gemara wants to say, like, is our Tana just mentioning things just for no reason? So that's called ruchla, or in Hebrew, a rachil. Okay, so it says lo selach rachil ba'amecha, and that is the primary source of lashon hara. So as the Rambam always does in the next line, he always says, well, what's the punishment? Before he gets to any of the myriad of details, he decides to talk about what the punishment is. And he says, sorry, but it's not malchus. So first of all, you don't get malchus. Why don't you get malchus for lashon hara? Well, we know that some of the rules of malchus are it has to be lav sheyesh bo maisa, right? Which begs the question of, meaning I could slander someone and cause him all this loss, and God knows what, and it's not called a maisa. So that's where that's where we kind of split hairs and say, yeah, dibur sometimes is not a maisa. That, by the way, ties into the whole discussion about pigul that we had for the last year in Kudshim. Is it speaking? Is it thinking? Whatever. We're not going to get into it now. There was a lot of ink spilt on that topic with all the commentators. Tosfos and Bava Metzia, Daf Memdala talks about it. Tosfos and Menachos on Shabbos actually talked about it on Daf Nun Hey, about what machshava means. Is it dibur? Is it not a dibur? Is it considered a maisa? But either way, just for simplicity's sake, according to the Rambam, you do not get malchus because there's no maisa. However, there's no maisa, but the Rambam ends off by saying you may not get malchus with the gorim lahag nefashos rabbos miYisrael, but much blood, okay, could be spilled based on people speaking bad about each other. L'kach nitzmach lo. That's why. Right. Yesterday we spoke about the end of the pasuk of Hocheach Tocheach Es Amisecha. Right. The beginning is more well known than the end. Here, you have a very similar, concept that the Torah ends off by saying Lo Samor Al Dam Reyecha. There's a connection between the beginning and the end of the pasuk that says that what it says literally, don't stand over your brother's blood or your neighbor's blood. Okay, which means that it could cause misa. And the Rambam ends off by saying Tzeh ulmad, right? Not from the Haggadah, but here he equates it to Ma'ira l'doeg ha'adomi. Right? We learned from Sefer Shmuel the famous story where Doeg was the chief shepherd of Shaul HaMelech. He was very, very loyal to Shaul, And when he found out that David ran to Achimelech in the city of Nov, Ir Kohanim, he went and ratted out David, and to Shaul. Shaul came to the city, and basically they claimed they didn't know David. And make a long story short, the entire city got destroyed, men, women, and children, all because of Doeg. And the Gemara does not have, the Gemara actually, I think in Sanhedrin, discusses how great Doeg was when it came to Talmud Torah and general things, but this was a big problem of his. And it did not end well for Doeg HaAdomi, all because he ratted out David, and, that was the end of that. So that's really how the Rambam introduces this very, very grave sin of lashon hara and the repercussions. Okay, so now he gets into the details, and again, I say this almost every night. These halachas don't do it justice. Obviously, we know the Chafetz Chaim wrote books and thousands of pages just on this next halacha that we're going to see, because there's actually three different levels. Okay, there's something called rechilus, then there's something called lashon hara, then there's something called motzi shemra. Okay, they're really all related, but the Rambam now discusses each specific one. Ezehu rachil, what's considered a rachil? Okay, so a rachil, like we said, is someone who goes around and he's a gossiper, or as we use in English today, the word yenta, right? The yenta word actually made it to the English language. It actually comes from, if anyone knows out there where the word yenta comes from, it's a big debate, but there's the yentel in Yiddish, but it actually comes from the Italian word of gentile, which means like noble, or someone who's pure and refined, like the English word genteel. So gentile, gentile, yentel, that's kind of the same family where that word came from for all of you etymologists out there. But yeah, that's the word we use, yenta, and it became very common in the 20s and 30s in the Yiddish theater to be a yenta. So that's really Webster's definition of what the Rambam is talking about, specifically what the word rachil means. Okay, and now he describes it and says, this is what it is. Zesha toen dvarim, someone who literally gets information, right? Like today, when we go online, the cookies get all your information, and the next day it'll tell you everything about you and what you want to buy. So that's what a rachil is. Someone who absorbs information from one source, and goes around literally like a yenta and says, hey, this is what I heard about him, this is what I heard about him, and they just repeat. I was tempted to say she, but I said they. They go and repeat everything that they hear for absolutely no reason, just to spread, right? Just to spread gossip. As we say, lola toelet, for absolutely no advantage, for no benefit, right? Just for the sake of spreading gossip. Okay, and so everyone always ends off and says, well, it's true, right? That happens to be the number one defense from any time anyone is ever busted for lashon hara. They said, well, isn't it true, right? So we heard it all our life. And the answer is, look what the Rambam's next sentence, afal pishu emes. Even though it's true, it's absolutely irrelevant whether the facts that are being spread are true or false. It doesn't really matter. It will matter for Motzi Shemra. We'll see that in a second. But in terms of Rechilas, it doesn't matter whether these facts are substantiated or not. Hareza machriv et ha'olam. This person, by spreading, right, by being a yenta, is literally, look at the words of the Rambam, destroying the world. Okay, yesh avon gadol mizeh ad ma'od. And then the Rambam goes on to say there's another great sin. Then you have Rechilus' first cousin, which is lashon hara. So what is the definition of lashon hara? Something that we hear all the time. We don't hear it all the time. I mean, we hear the term lashon hara all the time. What does it mean? So the Rambam tries to explain it very, very succinctly. He says, "V'hu hamisaper bignus chavero afal pisha omer emes." So the Rambam throws in the afal pi again and says, Ruvain tells Shimon. Ruvain talks trash about Shimon to Levi. That is, in one sentence, what the definition of lashon hara is. Again, Ruvain talks trash to Shimon about Levi. Okay, that is the definition of lashon hara, even if it's true, right? Even if whatever trash talking or whatever negative comments Ruvain decided to say is absolutely substantiated and true, okay, and it's even fact-checked by CNN, nevertheless, it is considered lashon hara. Okay? How about, so that's the first cousin. What's the second cousin of Rechilus? That is what we call motzi shemra. Because that is, not only are you spreading things, but you're making things up. That's the next level. Aval ha'omer sheker, nikra motzi shemra al chavero. If you say something that's false, blatantly not true, that's called motzi shemra al chavero. Okay, so that's the third level. So now the Rambam confuses matters, and the commentators are all up in arms about why he's going back to lashon hara now. By the way, there's a lot of commentary in the Kesef Mishnah and the Ravid. We're not going to discuss it, but again, he's trying to put in literally 6 lines what the Chafetz Chaim probably took 12 years writing, in 9 different Sfarim. So just, keep that in mind, that the Rambam is trying to be very, very, economic with his ink. So he says over here, what is lashon hara? Aval ba lashon hara zeh sheyoshev omer kach v'kach asa ploni. He goes to people. Reuven goes to Shimon and says, "This is what Levi did. V'kach hayu avosav, and this is what Levi's grandparents used to be like. V'kach v'kach shamati alav, and this is what I heard about Levi." Again, Reuven talking trash to Shimon about Levi, right? So you have 3 parties. Okay, this is called 3 parties involved. V'amar dvarim shel genai, al zenem are bad things, and that's what the pasuk says in Tehillim. Yachretz Hashem kol sifsei chalakos lashon midaberes gedolos. Okay, which basically says that God should cut off all lips that speak lashon hara. Okay, so that's really a bad thing, obviously. And if you're interested to know where the primary daf for lashon hara is, so yesterday we said that Erechin Tez Zayin was the source for Tochacha, and Erechin Tez Vav, one daf before, is pretty much the source for anything you ever wanted to know about what the Gemara has to say about people who speak lashon hara. Okay, that is located in Erechin Daf Tez Vav. And do we have time for one more? Yeah, we'll do one more. Amru Chachamim Shalosh Averes Nifraim Min Hadam Bolam Hazeh. Now the Rambam says, if you want to know how bad lashon hara compares to other bad things, here's what I'll tell you. Amru Chachamim Shalosh Averes, who are in Gimel, Nifraim Min Adam Ba'olam Hazeh Ve'in Lo Chelek L'Olam Haba. There are 3 sins which you get punished in this world, and you have no chelek l'olam haba. So we know these are the big 3: avodas kachavim, gilo arayos, shfichas damim. And here the Rambam quotes. Anyone know where this comes from? This is from an obscure Talmud Yerushalmi in Peah. If you're interested out there, that's where you would find. Again, the Rambam gets everything from Bavli, Yerushalmi. Here he takes it from Yerushalmi, where he equates. Right, the reason why it's in Peah is because it says Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam. Right, remember that? Elu Dvarim She'en Lahem Shiur. So on the negative side, the Yerushalmi in Peah discusses the 3 things that you don't know Chelek L'Olam Haba, and it says Lashon Hara Keneged Kulam. Lashon Hara is equivalent to all of those 3 things. Right? V'od Amru Chachamim Kol Masap Lashon Hara Ki L'Kofer Be'ikar. Now we're going to throw the book at you. Not only is it Keneged Kulam, there's a pasuk in Tehillim that says that you are tantamount to being denying the existence of God. Shenemar Asher Amru L'Lashonenu Nagbir Tzvatenu Itanu. Right, the pasuk says that he says, or they say that we will nagbir, we will be mighty with our tongue and with our lips. Mi adun lanu. Who will be the God over us? So when you're mighty with your tongue and your lips, you're almost saying, we have no one watching us from above. We're free, we're independent. There is no Lord above us. That is the source of the Rambam. Now, the Rambam says, V'od amru chachamim, and this is also a Gemara straight out of Erechin, Shlosha lashon harah horeges. There are three people, remember how we say, usually it takes two to tango? When it comes to lashon harah, that's an exception. It takes three to tango, because there are three parties. Remember, Ruvain talking trash to Shimon about Levi. So we got a triumvirate over here. We have three people. We have this ha'omro, that is Ruvain in this case, v'hamakablo, and this is Shimon listening, v'zesha omer alav, and that's Levi who's being trash talked about. And the Rambam is off by saying v'hamakablo yosar min ha'omro, and the one who listens to it is really worse. Believe it or not, this is hard to imagine, but Shimon in this case, the fact that he's lending his ear to Ruvain, right, to dump on Levi, right, that's actually worse what Shimon is doing, who's letting Ruvain talk, than Ruvain himself, the one who's speaking. Okay, we got to stop here. Tomorrow we're going to talk about Avak Lashon Hara. All right.